Hello, souls and demons, and welcome back to the portal. Today's story is called The Shadow Men, written by Getyaisha. It is based on actual events, so sit back, grip your seats, and enjoy. For the longest time, I thought I was alone. I never knew so many people shared an experience like my own. The world knows them as shadow people or shadow men. I've heard and read hundreds of accounts. From all that I've heard, most people have had negative interactions with these beings. But none of them seem to match up to what I went through. For me, this started when I was 8 or 9 years old. I don't really remember which. It was a blistering hot summer day. I was bored of sitting in the house, so I decided to go ride around on my bike for a while. After an hour or so, I couldn't take it anymore. It was just too hot to be outside. I went in and grabbed some water on my way to my room to try and cool off. We didn't have central AC back then, so I had a fan at the foot of my bed, one of those old school models with metal blades. I turned it on and lay across my bed to cool off and fell asleep after a few minutes. I don't know how long I was asleep before I heard my mother calling my name. I slowly opened my eyes and pushed up from the bed. Looking towards my bedroom door, I see a dark figure standing there looking in my direction. I didn't feel fear in that moment. I don't honestly remember feeling anything at all. The figure raised its hand and motioned for me to lay back down. When I turned to look at my pillow, I was shocked to be looking down at the back of my own head. I slowly laid back in place, and as I did, I instantly woke up. Gasping for air, I sprung up from my bed and sat there for a second. I yelled to my brother, who I thought had been calling my name, but no one responded. I walked through the house, eventually finding my mom outside in the garage. When I asked her what she'd called me for, she gave me an odd look and told me she hadn't called me at all. That was my very first time seeing them. From that point on, my life started to change. The first notable difference was my dreams. Since that day, I've been able to remember every dream I've ever had in vivid detail. I started having sleepwalking episodes where I would go to sleep in one room and wake up in another. Things only got stranger from there. The next event wouldn't happen until the following school year. Friday nights I would sleep in the main room because that's where the only television in the house was, as well as the AC. It was late. I was the only one awake in the house. I was sitting on the floor watching TV when I heard a psst. I ignored it at first, but when it happened again a few minutes later, my attention was drawn to the doorway leading to the hall. I slowly turned to look, and what I saw still haunts me. In the top left-hand corner of the doorway was a face. By the way it was positioned, it had to be coming through the ceiling. Its eyes were glowing a soft yellow, and its skin was a dark greenish gray. I sat there completely paralyzed by this thing staring at me. I tried to scream for my mother, but no other words would come out of my mouth. The next thing I know, I was waking up in my room the next morning. When I pulled back the blanket, there were leaves and dirt in the bed, and my feet looked like I'd been walking around outside. That night, my dreams changed. The first nightmare was of a giant. It had the head of a lion and the torso of a man. Its legs were goat-like, with a reptilian tail swinging freely behind it. I watched in absolute terror as the giant devastated my neighborhood, and as it came towards my house, I woke up. The nightmares became such a regular event, I got used to them and eventually started enjoying them. I wouldn't see the shadows again until I got into middle school. They would come to me at night and show me things. People and places I had no way of knowing, but ultimately ended up being completely real. This is when things took a turn for the worst. The first one was a friend of mine named John. We spent a lot of time just hanging out and goofing around, typical kid stuff. One night I ended up staying over at his house. That's when it started. The shadows came to me that night and showed me John killing his family. At first I wrote it off as just another nightmare, but a few years later I saw the truth for myself. It made national news. John killed his mother, sister, and stepfather. When asked why, he told them, They made me do it. Deep inside, I felt like it was my fault. So from that point on, I avoided getting too close to anyone. That worked for a while until I hit high school. One night, the shadows gave me a vision of myself giving a stranger a ride home. When the stranger got out of my car, he was shot and killed. A few weeks later, after football practice, I gave a guy named Norris a ride home. I didn't really know him at all, but we were on the same team, so it wasn't that big of a deal. The next day, it was all over the school. Norris had been shot and killed later that night. About a month or so later, they came back. This time they took me to some apartments. They showed me two friends arguing. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but by the end of the confrontation, one shot the other, then dragged his bleeding body out to the sidewalk and ran away. Not long after that, I met a girl named Georgia. We were never a couple, she was just a super cool person, and we hit it off right away. She had an older brother named Derek. Everyone knew him as one of the popular kids. One afternoon after school, he got into an argument with someone close to him and the guy ended up shooting him in the head before dragging him outside and going on the run. Things got quiet for a while after that. Then the shadow started showing me one of my older cousins named Andrew. In the visions, Andrew's head would be abnormally large and black blood would run from his eyes. They would show me this exact same thing over and over for weeks, until one day my mother came to me and told me Andrew would be coming to stay with us for a while. When I first saw him, it took my breath away. His head was exactly like I had seen it in the visions. I didn't know what to say or how to act. At this point, I was starting to think I was losing my mind, and when I started finding black blood in the sink and in the toilet, I couldn't take it. Eventually, I'd find out that Andrew had a tumor the size of a lemon in his skull. It was cancer, or at least that's what I was told. He passed a few weeks later, and it did something to me. I started seeing crowds of shadow people in my visions, but there was always this one face that wasn't shrouded by darkness. She was beautiful. She had these markings on her face, and she traveled with a wolf. I would see her face over and over to the point I was able to draw her from memory, but I had no idea who she was. I eventually dropped out of school and started getting into trouble. After a few years of the street life, I took the money I had saved and started a record label. The label grew from a one-man show to a crew of 13 people. By this time, I had 2 children. Gotten married and divorced, life was almost normal. The nightmares never stopped, but the shadows hadn't come around in a while. Then one night they came to me. They showed me an image of the mystery woman at my side, crying tears of blood. It was a month later when she walked into my life. We met online. I was doing promotional photo work using Photoshop to create some amazing images, and she contacted me. When I saw her face, I instantly recognized her. Her name was Mariah. We eventually exchanged numbers and started talking almost daily. Then one afternoon she called and told me she was coming to town and asked if she could crash at my place while she was here. Of course I agreed. A few days became a few months and we were inseparable. It was never romantic, she was like a sister to me. One afternoon we got into a huge argument and she left. 2 weeks later, she was found dead on the side of the road near the Mexico border. I was devastated. I couldn't function. The record label fell apart, my life went into a tailspin, and suddenly, I was back at rock bottom. I left it all behind. I got a regular job and eventually met a wonderful woman. The shadows stayed away for years. Then one night they came back. This time they were different. It's hard to explain what changed about them. There had never been open aggression towards me, just the people around me. But these weren't like the others. I walked into my kitchen to grab a glass of water. While I was standing by the sink, one of them suddenly appeared. It stood next to me for a long moment, almost as if it were sizing me up. My natural instinct was to step back and grab a large knife from the dish drainer. It attacked me. I didn't think it was possible to hurt one of them, but I charged at it anyways. I plunged the knife into its gut and felt the impact. The shock of seeing it stumble back and drop to the floor froze me for a second. I couldn't believe what was happening. A much larger one appeared in my living room. It just stood there watching me. I'm not sure what came over me, but for some reason, I stepped over to the one on my kitchen floor and pulled what I thought to be its head back, exposing its throat. I looked directly at the big one that was watching me and drove the knife into its neck. In a flash, they were both gone, and I was left standing there holding a knife. I have no memory of putting the knife away or going to bed, but the next thing I know, I'm waking up to the sun shining through my window. It's been 2 years since then, and they haven't returned, but every once in a while, I swear I catch a glimpse of one watching me from a distance.